Hello and welcome to a special episode of Custom Time, a custom time how-to. Today we're gonna take a look at a couple of different Seiko dive watches and talk about bezels and then modify a modern bezel to be a bidirectional bezel. So stay tuned. Here we go. Welcome, watch fans, to this custom time how-to. Today we're going to talk about bezels, and before we get into the nitty-gritty of it, we're going to just do a little bit of a history breakdown on these Seiko divers. So the reason I have three watches here is because they really show three different generations of the Seiko dive watches. Starting over here, the 1978 Seiko 7548-7000, and this is 1981 version, but the 1978 was the very first use of this slim, the 7000 case. Later on, the 6309 divers, which were the turtles, were also offered in the slim case, and that's why they were, for a time, sometimes referred to as slim turtles. Now, after the 6309 turtle finished its run, Seiko no longer used the wider bodied cushion case all the way up until the recent reissue of the Seiko turtle, the SRP turtle. So we have the 7548-7000. This is the 7002-7000. This watch, the 7002 diver, replaced the 6309 diver as the premier automatic diver, once again using the same 7000 case. And then lastly, we have the SKX007, which came around 1996, with a whole new case, and you can tell that by just looking at it from the fact that this case has a crown exactly at 4, and this case has a crown at around 350, or 16 minutes after the hour. There's reasoning behind that. My guess is it has to do with using the same date wheel for both 4 and 3 o'clock crown cases, as opposed to having to have different ones like you would have had to for this. But that's another story altogether. Let's take a closer look at the bezels on these three watches. Okay, so starting with the 7548, what you'll see is we have a 60-click bidirectional bezel. Okay, same thing on the 7002. You'll recognize this is my reef shark that I just did a video, my previous video about. So 60-click bidirectional bezel. You can hear that nice, loud, coarse click on it. Now, with the SKX007, and you'll recognize this one from my pit stop video, what you have now is a 120-click unidirectional bezel. Okay, I can't turn it back in the clockwise direction. It only rotates counterclockwise. Now, for diving purposes, okay, this is beneficial, because let's say you set your time. Here's my minutes. Let's see, where's my loom pip? Here we go. I set my time to the minutes, right? Now I can watch how much time has passed. If I was to accidentally rotate this in the in the clockwise direction, okay, now I would think that I started later than I really did, right? And I'm diving, I've got oxygen. I think that my bezel moves. I think that I started later. There's a possibility I could run out of oxygen, right? So for that purpose, let's say I bumped this bezel. It could rotate forward, right? But it could not rotate back. It could rotate counterclockwise, but it could not rotate clockwise. That is a safety feature. But let's say you're not a diver, which most of us are not, and you are not going to use this watch for diving. In those situations, the unidirectional bezel can sometimes become a hindrance. Sometimes we do want to time something, and it may be easier to rotate in the clockwise direction rather than counterclockwise direction. Or for example, you put in a dual time bezel into this watch, dual time bezel insert like I did with my C-Lab mod, and you want to be able to rotate in both directions. You know, it's a pain in the butt to go all the way through here just to get all the way to this other side. So how do you convert this to a unidirectional bezel? Now, let's take a quick look at what differentiates these two bezel types. So starting with the 7002 or the 7000 case, we're going to go ahead and slip the case knife in there. This one pops off pretty easily because the gasket on it is pretty old. And as you know, this was kind of a rough, beat up watch. So I didn't spend a lot of time trying to clean up the bezel and replacing the gasket. I think it's working just fine for me at this point. But let's take a look. So here we have these grooves, these machined grooves on the bottom of the bezel. On the flip side, on the case, we have this ball right here. This ball sits on top of a spring, and the spring basically pushes the ball forward up against the top of the case. As the bezel rotates, the ball pops in and out of these grooves, essentially stopping the rotation of the bezel at specific intervals. Okay, so 60 grooves to create 60 clicks. Now, let's take a look at the SKX007 bezel. Once again, we'll pop the case knife in, give it a quick twist, pop off the bezel. Now, underneath here, you will see a very similar picture to what you saw on the other bezel. However, the big difference here comes on the case itself. You will no longer see the little ball. What you will see instead is this little click spring, okay? Now, the two holes in the case correspond with these two protrusions on the click spring to keep it steady in the same spot. And then on the flip side, you've got this little protrusion right here, okay? I'm going to try to keep this focused. There it is, okay? You see how it pops right up? Now, how this works then is, as this fits into the bezel, and the bezel rotates, the spring pops in and out of the grooves. But because of its shape, it will only rotate in this direction. However, it will stop the bezel from rotating in the opposite direction, okay? Now, here is the trick to turning this into a bidirectional bezel. We want to take this little protrusion, this little spring protrusion, and turn it from this shape right here into, and you can already see I've done it already on this side, this shape right here. So instead of just coming up like you see back there, you want it to come back down. All right. Now this is a pretty strong spring, with reason. So let's see if we can do this pretty quick. I've got a pair of needle nose pliers. Now what you'll want to do is actually give it a little bit of a push upwards first, because you want it to really, once you bend this down, you do still want it to protrude and pop into those grooves. Okay. So we'll go ahead and take this into the needle nose. And we'll try to hold it around the spot where we want the bend to happen. And then we'll use the back of the tweezers to bend this downwards. Okay. So, wow, I really went to town on this one. But however, this should still get the job done. In fact, I probably will try to do it a little bit more on this one the same way as I did on this new one. So let's go ahead and give it a pop here. So once again, take it into the needle nose, give it a little pressure. There it is, okay? So we have now 2 of these springs with this kind of up and down shape. All right, let's pop her back into the case. So the protrusions go down into the holes on the case, okay? Bezel goes on top, okay? Into the case press. Make sure to pick a, you know, if you have a steel die, if you have a steel bezel insert, it may not be as much of an issue, but try to pick a die that will press onto the bezel and not on the bezel insert, because if you have a ceramic insert, that could actually crack it. And give it a press. There we go. And now let's check the operation. So here we go. We got counterclockwise rotation and we have clockwise rotation. Now what you'll find is sometimes when you first do this, it'll be a little coarse, the operation, okay? But by giving it a few rotations in both directions, the spring will settle down and you'll get a nice bidirectional bezel. Okay, so there it is. We've got our bidirectional Seiko SKX007 bezel. If you have questions, concerns, or comments, let me know. Otherwise, happy modding and cheers, Watch Fam.